Okay, welcome back. Session 2 is titled Rethinking Conventions, and our first speaker will be Mr. Dan Meridor, former Deputy Prime Minister and Intelligence Minister, who will speak about Israel's defense doctrine following October 7. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone here. 20 minutes is a lot of time to talk about such a tiny issue like Israel defense doctrine. I'll try to do it without being too deep, but point at some important developments. Generally speaking, with a long-term perspective, Israel defense doctrine has been an immense success story. Think of it from a perspective of an Arab leader, say after 1948, after the War of Independence, when we survived. And I think an Arab leader who fought against us would look at the map, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean, Morocco, all the way to Iraq, is all Arab. Number of people, lands, and a very tiny 600,000 Jews, and they won the war. It seems unnatural, and it would not be stupid to say, hey, we should continue to resist, to object, to boycott, to fight. In the end, we'll have the upper hand. Asymmetry works. And this was the Arab policy, boycotting and terror and other things. In fact, happened the opposite. And from a certain period in time, there was a beginning of understanding in the Arab leadership, many of them, that Israel is here to stay, and let's see if we can live with them. I do believe that the major turning point was in 1967, the 6 Days War, which I, being quite old to have participated in as a tank commander, and you may not know, most of you haven't been born, but the world thought Israel is going to be kicked off the map. And we won dramatically, and this changed not only the perception, but the reality. And then there was the Yom Kippur War in '73 that started with a big Israeli failure, but ended up with a victory. I think this created a change. The most important one has to do with the Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, the prime minister of Israel, 1977-79. Not that Sadat became a member secretly of the Zionist movement, not as far as we know, nor did the other Arab leaders, but reality said its word, and we have to live with them. The idea that you can get rid of Israel is off the map. And there was leadership. Let me say something about leadership, which is, I think, important and very much in shortage these days. There's a tension in the leader between representing the people. You were elected, not chosen by God or by the Pope, but elected by your people, represent them, or leading the people to where they wouldn't go without you. In order to get elected, you try to see what they want to hear, and you say it, and sometimes you get elected. Had Menachem Begin or Anwar Sadat gone to a referendum asking, should we do that, there would be a resounding no in both countries. Let me speak of my man, Menachem Begin. He had to convince, it's a democracy, but he had a long fight to convincing people that that's the right thing to do. What are you doing? You're giving away all of Sinai, 3 times bigger than Israel, to a dictator in another country. He will fall to war. What are you doing? He was convinced he's right, and convinced, and the rest is history. And from our perspective, Egypt, the most important Arab country, Arab League is in Cairo, as you know, the strongest Arab country, has become a friend, a country we have peace with. Then after that, somewhat later, there was a Madrid conference in '91 where Jordan and Palestinians came to talk with us. Syria came to talk with us. It didn't yield the results we wanted, but not much later, there was the Oslo Agreement in '93, I didn't like it very much, but it was in the same direction of accepting Israel. We have to find a way. 94, there was the Israel-Jordan peace treaty with King Hussein, Allah yarhamu, and Prime Minister Rabin, who died also by now, murdered. So we had Egypt and Jordan in peace with Israel, and many other countries informally, in the Gulf area, in North Africa. Then we had, some years ago, the Abraham Accords, and there was a talk about Saudi Arabia. Now, I speak of a very long range view, not just on the topic. It's a too long, sometimes nerve-breaking, but very positive process. That's built on the fact that we are here to stay. We had a strong army, economy, science, what have you. Number of Jews in this country, now over 7 million people. It's a good story. But when we speak of Israel defense doctrine, with which I dealt in several times in my life as a public servant, there are changes. And I want to say something about changes and doctrine. Doctrine, defense or otherwise, has to do with thinking long range and broad, not just for the moment, years to come, because if you want to understand what's going to happen, you need to prepare yourself. It takes time. This is what we always preach when we spoke of defense doctrine. I'll speak of it in a minute. But we live in an era of unprecedented, accelerated pace of change. Things are changing dramatically, quickly, paradigm changes. Had I spoken here in this university 30 years ago, nobody would have a computer at home. We still have Encyclopedia Britannica to look at. The world was entirely different. The culture was different. The economy was different. Everything is changing very rapidly. We live now in an era of AI beginning. We don't know how the world is going to look. And when times are changing, it's very important that you understand the change in time, adapt yourself to it, or else in the area of defense, you do what people say about generals. They know how to fight the war they won in years ago. And if it's the same war that they're fighting today, no problem. But if it's entirely different, they're going to lose the war. Think of trying to convince a general in the army, a head of, commander of brigade, who's fighting for his homeland all those years and is very brave and very patriotic. Tell him, go home, your methods are over. He won't listen to you. I speak of a brigade commander of the Polish cavalry in 1939, who knows that Poland is to be defended by cavalry, by horses. All the years it was like this, against Germans, against Russians, against Lithuanians. The fact that in Germany somebody builds tanks, he didn't listen to that. And this hypothetical general would be killed in a month that it took the Germans to go from the border to Warsaw, because he did not understand the change. So things are changing very rapidly. I want to to say something about what we found basically and about the changes. You know, we prepared our army for many years against the possible attack from all sides, with the psychology and the reality of a small country surrounded by enemies. And we built quite a good army. When I looked around me, last time we did it was almost 20 years ago, I remember saying, hey, Egypt is a friend. They don't fight with us for many years. Great. Jordan is a friend. They don't fight with us. They are intimate friends with us. Iraq is not in the game, and if it was not, usually they were supposed in the scenarios to send the help of their brigades. They're not there. Syria doesn't exist as an army anymore. So you have a great army. What do you need it for? Who's going to fight you? The conventional warfare doesn't seem to be a threat. I mean, it can happen, 10%, 20%, but probability, it's not the main threat. So the conventional warfare against us by all our enemies seems to be much less probable than in the past. So can we just celebrate and say that's the end of the world? No. Two other layers have been brought into the battlefield. One is above conventional, nuclear. That we saw, you remember Saddam Hussein with the French nuclear reactor that our Air Force had to take down in '81. We saw Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, if you remember this guy, We didn't know. We had no clue. I remember in 2001 or 2, George Tenet, the head of CIA, comes to us and says, Gaddafi, Libya is on the way to become nuclear. With the Pakistani proliferator, Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, devoted Muslim, a very smart man. We had no clue. And the Americans, the British, were able to take, by carrots and stick, to take Gaddafi down from the nuclear project. Then Syria was about to become nuclear. They had a project secretly held with North Korea. We found out about them, and this was taken out by our Air Force in 2007. Iran is getting nuclear or not, I leave it that. So there's another layer of defense which was not there in the beginning. What do you do with it? What's the doctrine to build? Can you prevent it? If you don't prevent, how you defend? The whole thing, I leave it open. More important is the other layer, below conventional, what I'd call terror and guerrilla. Guerrilla to me is against army, terror against civilians. Here's a dramatic change. There always was terror, people kill people since since humanity exists. But something dramatic happened. In our modern era, the last decades, because of technology mainly, human beings, people were empowered in a way you never knew in history. 5 billion people have this at their hand in the world, and all the knowledge in the world is accessible to them. How do you bake a cake? How do you make a nuclear bomb? Everything is here. You can sit on an island in the Pacific, and you want to know, you don't need to go to Harvard, Yale, La Sorbonne, or even McGill. You read it here. Never in human history was so much knowledge, information in the hands of everybody. Technology, not in the hands of government anymore. What is Microsoft? What is Apple? Finance, very rich people, companies can do a lot without governments. So people are much more powerful than ever in the past. This is great. If you are a liberal person believing in human beings, we are all about people, not about the states are built for people, not the other way around. So great. Tom Friedman from the New York Times, one of his books in 1999 or 2000, explaining globalization, the Lexus and the olive tree, it's called, he had coined a phrase, a term, the super empowered individual. This is what we have. And he celebrated it like me. Then I remember after 9/11, 2001, I talked to him, I said, you know, Tom, this is another super empowered individuals. The Soviet Union built a huge army after 45, but the billions of rubles, they couldn't kill one American, and they collapsed, they had no money for it. In steps Mr. Bin Laden, might have spent $2 or $3 million, hit America, in the middle of America, in New York, in Washington. Didn't you know, intelligent people in the intelligence, that there is Al-Qaeda? Yeah, and another 1,000 organizations like this. In the old days, there were 3, 4 players. Your neighbors, superpowers. Now there may be thousands. People can do a lot of good, a lot of bad. The actors are many. It's a huge change in the doctrine of defense. New York was not attacked from New Jersey. It was attacked from Tora Bora in Pakistan. So the power of individuals and small groups got much more powerful than ever in the past. What we call non-state actors. The good ones, the bad ones, not always in certain territory. Sometimes it's in the network. And they can do a lot. Think of somebody who uses the cyber to attack a system in another country. So the word defense has to do with the old paradigm, but the world is changing. And the question how you build a doctrine of defense when the world is changing that much is what I'm going to speak of a little bit here. The power of the wars that are waged now are very different from wars in the past in several elements. One is interesting to me. In the past, from the beginning of humanity until some decades ago, people didn't see war when it happened. You could live in Paris in 1812 when Napoleon invaded Russia, and you could eat good French food and have some other French nice Dolce Vita. And until Napoleon came back with the way he looked, you understood that the war didn't go so well. still didn't know how war looks like. It took, I think, 80 years for Tolstoy to write War and Peace, and you see how Natasha and Pierre describe the war. Today, wars are seen on the screen while they happen. And now I can tell you from my experience, and it's not unique to me, wars are awfully ugly. People get killed, people are wounded, children look for their parents in a demolished house. It's awful. And when wars are seen on the screen, and new things happen here. If you are very strong, too long a time, you become a villain, although you're not a villain, you were attacked. If you are very weak, too long a time, you become the underdog, everybody helps you. We saw it happening several times. And it's not fair, it's not right, but to overlook it, not to take into account and prepare a war, would be a mistake. Because if the war is lost on the screen, it may be lost, because the world says something about it. There's one change that occurred. This is why when you prepare for wars, you need to ask yourself, what can I do in a certain period of time if I am the strong guy, not if I'm the weak guy. This is a huge change that happened in our days. I remember it in the campaigns we had with Gaza in the 2006, 2008, and so forth. In the beginning, everybody said, you're right, and kill them and hit them. Even Arab countries said it to us. After some days of bombardment and the pictures in the world, which are tragic, they are, the world turns against you. Not to look at it, unfortunately, some governments, I don't want to say which of them, doesn't take into account, and it's a big mistake. It limits the power that you can use because people see it. It's good, it's bad, this is a fact of life. Moreover, there has been a change of technology. And some people now, as a result of the October 7th, say, no, you forgot the old thing, technology is not everything. It's not everything. But when I look at the Houthis from Yemen, not about us. Several years ago, there was an attack by the Houthis, by drones, hundreds of drones, against Saudi Arabia. They destroyed half of its oil production. Technology, drones. Houthis. When I saw in this war, Hezbollah using drones in the Galilee. So we still think of what happened and what was our challenge then. Things are changing rapidly on both sides. And we need to take them into account when you build your defense system or your attack system. One speaks of deterrence, and then of early warning, and then of defense, and then of victory. These four elements are usually what you speak of in defense doctrine. Deterrence is important. You deter the other guy, don't dare or else I'll kill you. This works in life. But what if the other guy is not a state, somebody who has something I don't have? He has direct line to God Almighty, he knows what God wants and he works for him, he's ready to sacrifice. How do you deter Al-Qaeda? Can you deter a non-state actor? If, maybe yes, it's a different story. Early warning. Syria and Israel were enemies for many years, still are. I knew where to look, where to listen to see if Syria is preparing something. If it's an organization living here or there, how would I have early warning? When there was a time some years ago of what we call individual attacks of terrorists, people heard some sermon in the mosque, and they took a knife and wanted to kill a Jew here. There's no system, nobody talks, no organization. How do you have early warning against this sort of terror? People, not organizations even. The most difficult thing is about victory. Ask people in the street, how do you want to see the victory, the end of the war? They would give you, now we had May 8th, 1945, the unconditional surrender of Germany, twice by the way. May 9th, the surrender against the Russians. So the Dien Pobedi, the day of victory, is still celebrated in Russia. This is the best thing. This is victory, no doubt. Think of another victory, 6 Days War. June 11th, we won the war, but Egypt is still Egypt. They lost some land. Jordan is still Jordan, they lost land. Syria, the same thing. So it's not the same kind of victory, still victory. October 24th, 1973, the end of the Yom Kippur War. Yeah, they wanted ceasefire. We were seemed winning, but we couldn't get a whole Egyptian army from the Sinai. So it's a lesser kind of war. Can you have a victory against a terror group? Or is it illusion? There are terror groups who don't exist anymore. Some of you may remember Bader Meinhof in Germany, l'Action Directe in France, Brigate Rosse in Italy. There were some who don't exist, and some exist. Why do I say this? Because if you go to war, you need to decide what is the target, what's the end game. First, tell your people, tell your soldiers, tell the other side why. Because if in the end you don't reach that goal, you seem to have lost the war. Now, if you are the big side, the strong side, and the other is nobody, terror group, it's even, you are expected to win the war. If Barca, the group, the team of Barca in football has a game against some Israeli group and there's a draw, I know who won. Everybody expects you to win. So I always recommend it to whoever makes decision on going to a military campaign, first think what you can reach within the limits. What you think you can reach, only this, say in advance, I'm not going to kill all of you, I'm going to conquer, this is what I'm going to do. And then you may be able to succeed, or else you will be seen as losing. Very difficult. The people won't listen to you. People want to see total victory. They don't listen to the fact that maybe you can't reach it. The world is not that simple. Don't want to go to nowadays, but it's 18, 19 months of a war, and Hamas is still there. And we are 10 times stronger in many ways you count it, number of this and that. So what is deterrence? What is early warning? What is victory? Is changing in the asymmetric war that we see today. It's not the big numbers of satellites that America has or nuclear bombs. Al-Qaeda is a different story. So one needs to try to find a way to deal with these threats, not in the traditional way. And it's very hard because you need to think and rethink everything anew. Usually when big bodies have a change, they find it more difficult to change because they know what they are. The bigger the body is, the harder it is to change. The more prestigious they are, the less they listen to you. Armies are usually strong in procedures. So one needs to, when you write now defense doctrine, to do it by really the best people you can, not necessarily from the army, even from outside. And take some people with very good experience and some people who have no experience at all. I'll tell you the following story. I'll give a lot of lectures to the young people recruited to the intelligence community. They asked me to give lectures. I do it for years. About 30, 40 people, 18 years old, smart people, with two captains who are about 30 years old guarding them. And I always begin by saying, those commanders of yours, don't listen to them. So everybody says, well, they don't listen to them. That they are 30 years old, they're too old. I'm of a different generation. You need to think yourself. They don't have the answers. They know the old systems. So I do it provocatively, like to raise thinking. I really believe that some things are not anymore in the way a regiment is maneuvering, but maybe in the iPhone that I hold in my hand. So even defense is changing dramatically. And when you want to write a defense doctrine, you need to think of that. Another element here that brought me to the whole thing years ago was the fact that I was reported about the Israel defense plan for 5 years. It was great. But then when asked, do you have the resources for it? No, the government decides for 1 year only. So what's going to happen next year? There was no coherence between the money that they would have and the great ideas they have. You need to think thoroughly on the resources that you will have, on the challenges that may come. And the challenges have to do with developing technology and other things in the world. This is what I don't want to go deeper. We don't have much time. I want to go to the Middle East now. I would say the obvious. Without strength, we are dead. We wouldn't have been here. We will not survive. But this does not mean that force alone can do it. And the marriage of military strength, economic strength, and diplomacy is critical. Diplomacy is usually much less popular. It's not, I'm a strong guy and I know how to do it. But when I look at the Middle East, as was reported here, and I see now what we have the war. I don't want to go to speak on this. I want to say on the positive challenges. Syria is changing. We don't still know exactly how. Turkey, we heard Mr. Strauss on Turkey. Lebanon has a president, I'm finishing, a president who is a Christian who fights Hezbollah. Can there be a talk of joint interests? I don't know enough, but Syria is there. We don't need anything from Syria. We need the quiet border. Turkey wants to be influential. Isn't that a good way to think, to start talk with Turkey? Why not? Do I have an interest in what happens? It's not my business. If Turkey, maybe Turkey and us can do it together, or at least we can come to some agreement. It's not only, I mean, as I said, without force we are dead, but force alone will not do it. Diplomacy can help here. The same thing has to do with Lebanon. I don't know what can be done now, but it seems that the first time after we hit Hezbollah badly in the new kind of war that we launched there, maybe this is the time to try to arrange a diplomatic route out of it to prepare for a better, more stable Middle East. The same thing has to do with other partners. I don't want to go all of them. We need to preserve what we have and not to make mistakes here. I'll give you one touchy example. When President Trump said he will want to evacuate by force, not by force, 2 million people to Egypt and Jordan from Gaza, if I were the government, which obviously I'm not, I would the first thing say, Mr. Trump, publicly I would say, do it only in coordination with Egypt and Jordan. We care about them. Because this was a threat to them. And they had to see in us partners, to see the threat. Not somebody who they may think we're behind this idea that will flood them with Hamas people. So even Egypt and Jordan, a very great asset in our strategic situation in the Middle East, needs to be nurtured all the time. It can't be let go like this. And I would end with this. We have this combination or even conflict between the need to think long and broad and the need to adapt ourselves to the changes that occur all the time. I think we've done it not so badly. We need to do it better now because the pace is getting quicker and quicker. One thing I want to warn against, there was a huge failure on October 7th, a year and a half ago. Huge failure of our government, of our defense establishment, intelligence, everybody failed miserably. But you should not draw from this the conclusion that everything was wrong. Think logically. If there were another regiment there wouldn't be an attack. You didn't need a whole change. It was a huge mistake. So when you rebuild, don't try to pour money endlessly. We made this mistake in 1973. After the war, the hysteria of the government, they spent on defense for 10 years so much that in the mid-80s, we had 300% of inflation, 300% hyperinflation, no foreign currency, huge budget deficits. We were on the verge of collapse economically. And due to smart people from the academia, by the way, and the National Unity Government, Shamir Peres together, we came out of it, and we understood we need first to cut defense abruptly. We got in 1984 to 24% of GDP on defense. Awful. And we cut it, and thanks to Yitzhak Rabin, the defense minister, and Israel was on a great way from that day on. So even now, when one wants to change, don't spend money without any calculation. You won't have it in the end. So try to look to the future and manage the risks. It's not 100%. Manage the risks much better than we did last time. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Ms. Miret Guetta from the University of Haifa. Her topic is Revisiting Islamic Concepts of War.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. We have 20 minutes to talk about philosophy, international law, and Islamic law. It is a big challenge, but I hope it will be okay. Right and wrong behavior in the framework of military activity places us, from a research point of view, in the field of ethics, a branch of philosophy. The rules and restrictions for conducting warfare are termed jus in bello, or just warfare. On the other hand, the rules that determine the proper circumstances for declaring war are known as jus ad bellum, or a just war. The significant point here is that if the war is just or the warfare is just from a philosophical standpoint, these pose two separate questions. A declaration of war may be viewed as being just, in spite of the fact that what occurs during the conduct of the said hostilities is totally unethical, or vice versa. The war itself may be unjust in countless ways, even if it is conducted according to all of the accepted rules of ethics. In contemporary international law, there are a number of conventions designed to deal with the organization and codification of the law of war. Each addresses a number of issues such as medical treatment for wounded combatants, the right behavior towards and treatment of prisoners of war, the prohibition against arming civilians deliberately. These issues are also found in Muslim law. Islamic jurisprudence based extensively on the Quran and the Sunnah. In order to examine appropriate or inappropriate behavior according to an Islamic concept, first we need to approach normative religious ethics that begins with the sources of Islam and which prescribe many rules of law and morality for men. Islamic law embraces all human actions and categorizes these actions ranging from moral to legal, sometimes without distinctions between moral and legal. On the other hand, some believe that in Islam there is a sharp distinction between law and ethics. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya is an important medieval Islamic jurist and theologian belonging to the Hanbali school, and regarded as one of the most important thinkers, claimed in his book Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada that we have common sense and we know how to distinguish between good and bad. And this precedes the declaration of a system of justice and law based on revelation and acts independently of them. Otherwise, there would be no basis for thinking by analogy. Yet, it should be kept in mind that the legal subject matter forms part of a system of religious and ethical rules. The central concern of Islam is man's action, his obligations to God's words as expressed in his commands and prohibitions. The Holy Quran and the Sunnah represent a set of ethical values by which an effort will be made in my study to understand the philosophical ethical foundations of Sharia law in general and according the laws of war in Islam in particular. My proposed study examined the Sharia's attitudes towards human shields in war and examine what moral concepts emerge from the writings regarding behaviors that are considered proper or improper within a certain military activity. The use of civilians as a human shield during hostile activities has become one of the main problems that face current military conflict. But please be aware that this is not a modern phenomenon. The use of human shields has long violated international humanitarian law. In the body of contemporary humanitarian law applicable during international armed conflict, Additional Protocol 1 of 1977, Article 51.7, provides the broadest and most specific prescription. In addition, Rule 97 of the International Committee of the Red Cross provides the use of human shields is prohibited. Pichter wrote in his commentary to the First Geneva Convention, according to Article 28, that during the last World War, public opinion was shocked by certain instances of belligerents compelling civilians to remain in places of strategic importance, or to accompany military convoys, or to serve as a protective screen for the fighting troops. Such practices, the object of which is to divert enemy fire, have rightly been condemned as cruel and barbaric. Ruses of war are not a valid pretext for breaking the law. The lawfulness of ruses of war depends on the observance of the laws and customs of war, which are themselves based on the principle of respect for the civilian population. Consequently, the presence of civilians must never be used to render immune from military operations objectives which are liable to be attacked. The innovation in this research is the attempt to understand how the two legal systems, the Islamic and the Western, try to reconcile the different law systems and the moral principles, each on its own side, and whether they deal with the same question in different or similar ways. Many studies have been written in modern times on the subject of the law of war in Islam and try to gauge whether it was a utilitarian or absolutist ethical concept. Scholars such as John Kelsey, have tried to show the connection between the texts in Islam and Christian Western theories as far as the just war theory is concerned. The Christian theologian St. Augustine was the most prominent historical figure who provided a moral line of thought regarding war in Western world, and is considered the founder of the just war theory. The one who developed the theory later in the 13th century was Christian theologian Thomas Aquinas. Almost every theorist of the just war in the Western tradition relies on the work of St. Augustine. For example, Paul Ramsey points out that the origin of the concept of non-combatant immunity, which is the most important in the doctrine of just war, can be found in the work of St. Augustine. However, Holmes believes there certainly is no absolute prohibition against killing the innocent in Augustine. Please be aware that sometimes the most important central practical principle in just warfare is the prohibition of arming civilians, meaning the need to make a clear distinction in war between combatants and non-combatants, but in other times is formulated as a distinction between the innocent and the guilty. The use of both formulations causes a great degree of ambiguity in the subject before us and great difficulty in their practical application. After all, who is innocent during war and who is guilty? Johnson wrote, even though the moral theories of St. Thomas Aquinas evidence a highly sophisticated and intricate doctrine which prohibits the intentional slaying of the innocent, there is no indication that unarmed civilians should be considered innocent. Sometimes human shield is discussed within the framework of the principle of proportionality in an attempt to balance humanitarian considerations with military necessity. Therefore, my study also examines how the prohibition of using person as a human shield can be understood within the framework of the principle of distinction and the principle of proportionality, two leading principles that exist also in Islamic law. The Holy Quran states in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 190, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. We also find in the Holy Quran the principle of proportionality in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 194, فَمَنْ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. So whoever has assaulted you, then assault him in the same way that he has assaulted you. Or in Surah Al-Nahl, verse 126, وَإِنْ عَقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. And if you punish an enemy, all believers punish with an equivalent of that with which you were armed. The theoretical contribution of the discussion of Islamic law on the subject is the attempt to find in Sharia the adequacy of the principles of jus in bello, morality in combat, as reflected in the literature of international law. The answer to the question of whether we can tie all the conclusions to the comparative study above, to the article by Burns and Sorensen from 1988, who believe that most of us find a distinction between a person's avoidance of an action that leads to the death of another person and force shielding. Is there a difference between causing death to a person as a result of a certain evasive action and using him as a human shield? An example often presented is the case of terrorist groups. In the first scenario, Ellison is one of the 25 US government officials on a plane. Each of them carries a folder with an official office sticker on it. The hijackers announced that they would kill one American every hour until their demands were met. Ellison secretly covers a stamp with a sticker that says Libya. The kidnappers skipped over a folder and shot Beatrice, the American who was after her. In the second scenario, the same case, but here Ellison doesn't have a Libya sticker. Instead, she switches a folder with that of Babette, a French journalist who gets up at the same time. The terrorists shot Babette. Cases of this type raise moral and legal dilemmas. The moral puzzle tries to explain why we tend to see person A as less guilty in the first situation than in the second. Can we conclude from the moral model presented in their article for cases of human shield in war? How does the principle of distinction as stated above be reconciled with Muslim religious leadership in light of the mass casualty attack that occurred on September 11, 2001, or attacks on public transportation in Madrid, 2004? Finally, how relevant is it all for the Hamas current assault against Israeli civilians and holding them hostages near its headquarters? And here, I would like to take it one step and ask the difficult moral question. Who is responsible for the damage caused to the human shield? The one who placed him there, or the one who shot him? And we must ask ourselves this question from a legal point of view, of course, but also from a moral point of view, and it's not that easy to answer. We have to analyze it according to actions, intentions, and consequences, like we do in philosophy, with the doctrine of double effect, for example, or the doctrine of doing and allowing. One sentence, please, about the doctrine of double effect. It says that we may do what will cause a bad outcome in order to cause a good outcome if and only if the good is in appropriate proportion to the bad. We do not intend the bad outcome as our means to the good outcome. Jeff McMahon said, "It is generally permissible, I believe, because it normally involves allowing unintended harm to occur rather than doing or intending harm." In an attempt to answer difficult moral questions, utilitarian and absolute considerations play an important role. Those who take an extreme absolutist position may argue that it is not possible to sacrifice one person to save the lives of others, even if it is many, since human lives cannot be quantified. Therefore, according to this approach, under no circumstances should military targets be shot when it is clear and visible that as a result innocent people will be killed, including children and the elderly. On the other hand, in a utilitarian approach, the legitimacy of this kind of action will not be denied outright, provided that everything necessary is done to reduce the vulnerability of civilians. So the question is, can we find these thoughts in Islamic military ethics? Those who have read the Holy Quran and understand it can ask, what about Surah At-Tawbah, verse 29, for example? Here we have hermeneutic tool, the theory of abrogating and abrogated used by the Islamic legal system in dealing with contradictions within and between the Holy Quran and the Sunnah. Back to our case, it was found that some of the classic commentaries examined assumed that verse 190 remained valid. We should keep the principle of discrimination in war according to the Islamic military ethics and the international law. Sometimes it is that easy. I want to return to the difficult moral dilemmas that frequently arise in wars and talk about two events on October the 7th. In the first event, we have testimony from one of the hostages named Shani Goren from Kibbutz Nir Oz. She said that when the terrorists took her and other civilians to Gaza Strip, 150 meters from the border, they suddenly heard a combat helicopter in the sky. The pilot saw many terrorists with Israeli hostages sitting next to them. She said that suddenly a burst of gunfire was heard. The helicopter pilot makes a decision in an almost impossible situation. The pilot's intent was to neutralize the terrorists holding hostages. However, his action had a tragic consequence of causing death to one of the civilian hostages, Efrat. What can we say about the action of the pilot? It doesn't appear the pilot deliberately targeted Efrat or intended to kill her. His firing was directed at a vehicle containing terrorists threatening Israeli lives. The death of Efrat, while tragic, seems to have been an unintended civilian casualty resulting from an attempt to stop the terrorists and rescue the other hostages. The last event is the story of Kibbutz Be'eri. According to the testimony of Yasmin Porat, the commander of the terrorist force, Hassan, called the police and said, "I'm from Al-Qassam. If you make a trouble, I will kill one of the hostages. I want to take them all to Gaza. If someone shoots on the way, I will kill one hostage." When the troops arrived, volley of shots started, madness, chaos outside, shooting from both directions. It was clear that the job of the chosen hostages is to be a human wall between IDF forces that arrived and between Hamas. The commander hugged Yasmin around the neck and starts leaving the house with her, and there are shots outside. Yasmin said, "I shouted, 'Soldiers, please, stop. I am a civilian. We are advancing in your direction.' And they really stopped shooting. Yasmin came out of the house and saw Tal, Adi, and Adas lying on the ground, face to the floor, protecting themselves. At the same time, the shooting from the direction of the terrorists doesn't stop for a moment, and it includes launching RPG missiles and dozens of grenades. The fighters were constantly preaching through the megaphone, trying to get more terrorists to surrender. They feared that the terrorists would decide to kill all the hostages. The investigation has begun, and we know now, I don't know it is exactly the details, but we know that one of the hostages that survived she was human shield. Yasmin, that was used as a human shield by Hassan, she was actually the one of the two who survived. So we said it's barbaric, it's cruel, it's against the law, but she survived. I would like to finish my words with the understanding that there is no such thing, absolute immunity for civilians in war, neither in the Islamic military ethics nor in international law. All we can try is minimize the atrocities. Thank you for your listening.
Our third speaker in this afternoon is Mr. Uriah Shavit, head of the Cotler Institute, and he will discuss the following topic. Is the two-state solution still viable?
Is the two-state solution still viable? The thing is that ever since October 7, and in fact also before, you keep hearing the same cliches on part of the Israeli right and the Israeli left, and sometimes I feel no one stops for a second to think whether they make sense at all. I'll give you one example. Ever since October 7, you hear how many times have you actually heard the following sentence? You cannot defeat Hamas because you cannot kill an idea. How many times have you heard this one? Because many, numerous. Well, of course, you cannot kill an idea because idea is something abstract. But what you can do is discredit an idea. What you can do is make the political manifestations of an idea impossible. It is based on that logic Nazi Germany would still exist, and communism would have prevailed. Of course, you can kill an idea in the sense of killing its actuality, its political manifestation. Then on the side of the Israeli right, you hear a lot that the only language, I love this phrase, the only language that the Arabs understand is conquest of territory. That is the only signature of victory that Israel can achieve. Well, historically, that's nonsense. 1967 was followed immediately, the day the war ended, the Six-Day War, the day it ended, was followed by the War of Attrition, which was followed by the Yom Kippur War. And in the history of this conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the one thing that actually brought peace were peace agreements. That is a fact. These are just two examples. And I think when discussing the two-state solution, both the Israeli right and the Israeli left are repeatedly and now for decades being either dishonest or blind to many basic truths. The ideas I'd like to share with you now are based on an article that I just published in Hebrew in a journal called Ashiloach, which I don't think I will do it injustice if I'll say that it identifies itself as a platform for the settlers movement or the more right-wing Israelis, but they commissioned my essay, they published it, and I mentioned that not just as a as a word of gratitude, because I think people often confuse freedom of speech and pluralism. Freedom of speech is that everyone is shouting. Pluralism is that we actually listen, and that's something we are very much missing in Israeli public discourse. Not just to express your views, but also to be able to listen to views that are not yours and consider them and contemplate about them. So is the two-state solution still viable? Well, there are other solutions that are entertained. One that I'm not sure Israelis are quite aware of how common it became, how widespread it became in Western capitals, is the one-state solution. There's not going to be one state in this land. There would be a majority Arab state or a majority Jewish state, and those who think a one-state solution is a good idea are advised to visit the histories of Yugoslavia, of Cyprus. This doesn't work. When you have such contesting visions and heritages, it just wouldn't work. Then there is a solution that even 3 years ago, 5 years ago, no serious moral person would entertain in public, which is to transfer the Arab population and have one Jewish state. Now, putting aside, and we shouldn't put aside, but putting aside those minor issues of morality and international law, just practically speaking, which country exactly would absorb 2 million Palestinians? I would take Trump on his word if he attached to his political or geopolitical program an invitation to 500,000 Palestinians to become American citizens. But we don't really see that happening, do we? Now, the fact that option number one does not seem to be viable, and option number two does not seem to be viable, or that both seem to be terrible ideas, does not make option number three viable. You know, sometimes I have in lectures people asking, so what's your solution? Well, the fact that you discredit one solution, another solution, doesn't mean that the third solution is the one. It doesn't work that way. Not in medicine and not in politics. But my answer to the question whether or not the two-state solution is still viable is a bit complicated. The answer is no, but, or if you prefer, yes, but. Here are the buts. This is a solution that has been negotiated and discussed now for over 3 decades and has not come close to resolution, has not come close to solid implementation. That is the fact. Now, there are those who say it was all just a series of misfortunes. If Rabin had not been assassinated, if Olmert had not been indicted, if, you know, when things are again and again so close to happening, and then they don't, maybe the reason is that they were not meant to happen. Maybe it's not some kind of an accident. Then there are those who say it's because of the extremists on both sides. The problem with this theory, this thesis, is twofold. Number one, it wasn't the extremists who were unable to reach compromise. It was the mainstreams. And number two, the notion of extremists often also holds the idea that there is something inherent about Islam that is violent or anti-peace. And truth is, I regret that Ophir is not still with us because he just really published an excellent book in Hebrew about the discourse in Arab societies on peace with Israel. And what you see is extremely well-versed ulama who explain based on the Quran why peace with Israel must be signed, and extremely well-versed ulama who explain based on the exact same Quran why peace with Israel must never be signed. So the truth is, it's not about Islam, it's about the way people interpret Islam. Why has the two-state solution, negotiated and advanced by some of the most brilliant political minds on this planet, why has it not come to fruition? Why has it not been actualized? I list in my article the following obstacles, which are very serious obstacles. One is that this conflict is somewhat unique in being a twice or double imbalanced conflict. That is, conflicts tend to be resolved either in a situation of perception of balance. Two sides believe they have more or less the same strength. They have nothing to gain from continuing the fighting. Or in a situation of perception, at least, if not actual, imbalance. One of the two sides to the conflict is so much stronger than the other that it has the possibility of imposing its terms. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict at large are unique in being double imbalanced. And they're double imbalanced, and increasingly so, by the way, because of the following. Israel is stronger technologically, Israel is stronger diplomatically, and Israel is stronger militarily. I don't think I need to outline all the disparities between Israeli strength and Palestinian, or also between Israeli strength and the Arab strength. But there is one component of national strength where the Arab side, and in fact the Palestinian side, are much stronger, or at least have an advantage, and that is, obviously, population size. And it's not just the existence of 400 million Arabs and a small island of 7 million Jews in the Middle East. It's about the fact that the number of Arabs and the number of Jews between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, that is, between the river and the sea, is exactly the same. Meaning that Israel faces a grave obstacle in translating its military advantage into political gains. What was the thing Hamas kept saying in the years before the war started? Does anyone remember? Because they said it openly. They said, we invite you to come and occupy Gaza. We know you don't want to do that. It would be a nightmare for you. And Hamas's concept of war was that Israel would be deterred from doing exactly what it is trying to do now, which is to take over parts of Gaza. Because that means taking care of 2 million Palestinians, hostile Palestinians. Why would Israel want to do that? Obviously it wouldn't. To this obstacle, we have to add another one, which is that in the history of this conflict, one faction among the Arabs, who are the Islamists, Shiite Islamists, and perhaps more importantly, Palestinian Islamists, Sunni Palestinian Islamists, never lost a war against Israel, at least until recently. despite the being outgunned and outnumbered, in fact, all the conflicts between Hamas and Israel and between Hezbollah and Israel just until recently ended in what can be described as a draw or without decision. Now, if you believe that God is on your side and you keep not losing, it might just encourage you to believe that God is really on your side and you should keep fighting. This brings me to the third point. Take a look at this map. So here is the idea that brilliant negotiators had for years. This territory, which represents 100% of mandatory Palestine, at least mandatory Palestine as of 1923, because as you know, originally mandatory Palestine was supposed to include also Transjordan. This territory represents, as you see it, where 15 million Jews and Arabs live at the moment, and where, according to negotiators, 5 million Palestinian refugees are supposed to find their home, ultimately, and hundreds of thousands of Jews, if so they wish, would migrate to. Look, there is a serious ecological issue here. There just isn't enough territory. And I often hear, well, why can't Gaza be like Singapore or Hong Kong? Well, it has to do with the fact that there are Palestinians living there. It's not Singapore and it's not Hong Kong. This is still largely an agrarian society. Land is needed. Land is cherished. So this 100% of territory that people were negotiating is simply not enough. It's not about symbols, it's not about sentiments. It is also about symbols and sentiments, but just a pure matter of there isn't enough territory. Which brings me to obstacle number 4. Obstacle number 4 is that because those 100% of the territory were negotiated again and again and again, and by now, the basic starting positions of the Israeli mainstream, or what used to be the Israeli mainstream, and the Palestinian one, that is the PLO, are so well known, the result of any negotiation at the present time, based on these 100%, would have to be that someone would end up being presented as the loser, the one who gave up on something he or they were not willing to give up before. Because this was negotiated and negotiated and negotiated. And the two sides made clear their positions. So these are the 4 obstacles the two-state solution has faced. And in my article, I suggest several ways of trying to remedy those problems, which just might, and I emphasize the word might, they most likely won't, but just might pave the way in the future, in the very far future, to a two-state solution. Number 1, and I want to be as clear as possible in saying that, this war in Gaza must end with the full, unmitigated surrender of Hamas. It has to end with Hamas not being in power in Gaza. That should have been the goal of the war from day one. It was not how the Israeli government presented it. That was a grave mistake. I'm not sure why it was made, I can guess. But nevertheless, the first people in the world to advance this goal, to make this goal the one goal of the war, should have been those who believe in the two-state solution. Look, here's the thing. In history, when we study history or political science, we can't repeat the experiment. I sometimes envy biologists, they can. We can't. We don't know what would have happened in the diplomatic process that began in 1993 if there was no Hamas. We don't know. I do know, despite what many people in Israel argue today, that there is a difference between Hamas and the PLO. Because words matter. And while the PLO has been ambivalent about what it wants, Hamas has never been so. It's been clear constantly that its one goal is to destroy the diplomatic process and take over all of Palestine. Now, if you believe in a two-state solution, how would a two-state solution ever be actualized when these people are in power anywhere with the ability to jeopardize it? This is ridiculous. And I have to say, it makes me personally very suspicious. If people are really in for the two-state solution, why are they also for the continuation of Hamas' presence in Gaza? So full eradication of Hamas from power in Gaza, that is the first remedy, the first thing that has to be done if we're ever to think of a two-state solution as a viable solution. Then comes the second point, which is, I think, the most crucial one, if you want to really think outside the box, not Trump outside the box on planet Earth. I once read a wonderful quote from the founder of the European Union. Then I looked for the reference. I could not find it. This is a remarkable thing. The most beautiful quotes are attributed to people who never said them, which doesn't make them less important. And he said, when you negotiate something and you can come to a solution, what you need to do is to broaden the parameters rather than to narrow them. That is, you can't now negotiate again the same 100% and hope for a different result. So in a sense, what I'm going to say now may sound ridiculous. The conflict needs to be expanded rather than reduced. What do I mean by that? Number one, Jerusalem. I think it was ludicrous of Israeli and American negotiators to think that the Palestinians, one of the weakest groups in a Muslim world of almost 2 billion people, they would be the one with the power and the will to give up on Al-Aqsa. It can be negotiated with them. Obviously not. The issue of Jerusalem, which is really the issue of one mountain, in the end, one mountain that happens to be very holy for Jews and very holy for Muslims, needs to be negotiated on a different level. The Jewish people and the Muslim people. And the solution needs to be arranged in accordance. Whether sovereignty will ultimately lie with God or would be joint, this cannot be left to Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And it also makes no sense. Territory. Truth is, it's not a Palestinian whim. Those 22% of mandatory Palestine, and in fact less so given that most of the settlements would not be dismantled in any reasonable negotiation or compromise, the 22%, and again, in fact less, are just not enough. So you need to create more land. How do you create that? First, Israel has a defense minister today who is, let's be honest, he's not an impressive guy. But he's someone who sometimes thought outside the box, where others did not. And when he came up with the idea of artificial islands close to Gaza, everyone laughed. Why? Why? If you can create more land, why is that a bad idea? And then there is one huge desert attached to Gaza, or Gaza attached to that huge desert. And there is the Jordanian desert. Now, I'm being very careful with my words here. No one suggests an Egyptian concession of land. No one suggests a Jordanian concession of land because sovereignty is sacred. But if I own an apartment and I rent it to someone, it's still my apartment, and I can make a lot of money. Do you realize that 2.5% of the Sinai Peninsula, mostly uninhabited, would triple the size of Gaza and could potentially, by listing them, solve Egypt's very serious financial issues? Just something to think about. Just something to think about, because it's rational, it's good for all sides. And then comes the issue of imbalance. That imbalance has to be addressed. And the way to address it is to make it very clear to the Arab world that this is not the case of 7 million Jews facing 2 billion Muslims or 400 million Arabs or the same number of Palestinians. That can be achieved either by an Israeli integration one way or the other, maybe in the simple way, the straightforward way, into NATO. Although Chapter 5, Clause 5 of the NATO Charter is often, its importance is often exaggerated, but nevertheless, that would be a signal. perhaps Israeli integration into the European Union in one form or another. But it has to be clear to the Arabs that this illusion that this is a small Jewish island that will one day evaporate, this illusion is simply false. If all of those things take place, maybe a two-state solution could maybe be at some point possibly viable. But one lesson that has to be learned from the experience of the Oslo process, which I think, by the way, is more mixed than people tend to think today, but one thing that has to be learned is that it all has to happen way more slowly. And as it progresses more slowly, both sides would need to commit to not doing things that are irreversible. That would be Israel's burden. To not create on the ground a situation that would make a two-state solution impossible in the future. But on the Palestinian and the Arab side, on the part of the international community, there would have to emerge an understanding that this is not a process that can be completed in 1 year and not in 5 years. Because so much de-radicalization would have to take place in Palestinian schools, not just in Gaza, also in the West Bank, before a two-state solution as a long-term, as a true solution of peace could be achieved. Now, here's the thing. I started this morning by saying history is a history of surprises. That we tend to think of Yom Kippur War, the October 7 as the exceptions. They are, in fact, the norm. And I had the chance during the break to speak with the Swedish ambassador, with the Finnish ambassador. Those who know the history of Scandinavia know that things were not that cool there, and not that many years ago. So here is the most important thing all of us have to keep in mind. We have to understand, we have to appreciate that history is the history of surprises, but it's not just the history of bad surprises. It's also a history of good surprises. And you have to be prepared also for the good surprises and not lose hope. Thank you very much.